Welcome back to Capman Academy, and today again we are going to talk about non-specific immune response, and in that we are going to discuss about different type of organs and lymphoid tissues which are responsible for the activation, or you can say the maturation, of T and B lymphocytes. Right? So we had already discussed about different type of cells which actually play important role in different type of immune responses. So as we discussed, they are of various type. From them, granulocytes and agranulocytes are the one which are present in the majorities, right? And they contain the cells which actually phagocytose or neutralize the pathogenic cells. Right? Now let's discuss about different type of organs and lymphoid tissues. So as I mentioned earlier, that organs and lymphoid tissues are important part of the immune system, and they are needed for the activation or maturation of T and B lymphocytes. So we can say they are required for maturation and differentiation of lymphocytes. And according to their functions, they are categorized into two types: primary lymphoid organs and secondary lymphoid organs. So primary lymphoid organs are thymus and bone marrow. Secondary lymphoid organs are spleen, lymph nodes, and mucus associated lymphoid tissues. For example, gut associated lymphoid tissue, skin associated lymphoid tissue, and bronchial associated lymphoid tissue. So now let's talk about the primary lymphoid organs, right? So as I said that in mature undifferentiated lymphocytes are produced where? In the bone marrow, right? But mature and differentiated cells are activated in the primary lymphoid organs. First primary lymphoid organ is your thymus, right? As you can see in the image, that thymus is actually present in the thoracic cavity, right? And thymus, it is a highly organized lymphoid organ, right? Which is located above the heart, right? In this case, the immature cells which are generated in the bone marrows, they actually transported into the outer cortex of thymus, which is here. So this is the thymus, right? So your immature cells are actually transported into the cortex of the thymus, where they actually proliferate. Right? And they acquire the specific T cell surface markers. T cell surface markers. So therefore, thymus is the activation site for the T cells. And from these T cells, 90% of the activated T cells dies. This happens due to selection process, which is to distinguish between the self and non-self cells, right? After the activation of 10% T cells, which will only identify the non-self cells, they actually moved into the medulla of thymus organ. Right? So you can see here, this is your medulla. So your activated T cells then transported into the medulla. Right? And here, these 10% T cells, they get activated, fully activated. Right? And then they are released into the blood stream. Right, where they actually identify those specific antigens to the T cells and help them to neutralize them. Right, so if we simply say your thymus is the T cell maturation site. T cell maturation site. Right, if we talk about the B cells, then B cells, they actually get maturated in bone marrow, and this occurs in the mammals. Right? So simply B cells are produced in the bone marrow and then they are getting maturated in the bone marrow. Right? So they are being differentiated and matured in the bone marrow. So what is bone marrow? Bone marrow is this region, right, which is a site for B cell development, and it is present in the bone which is known as femur, and it is present in our thighs. Right, so this is the site for B cell maturation. But if we talk about the birds, in case of the birds, the undifferentiated cells, if we talk about birds, in that case, undifferentiated B cells, they actually moved into the bursa of Fabricius. Bursa of Fabricius. Right? And this is the maturation site for B cells in case of birds. So sometimes question can be asked from here also. So in case of birds, bursa of Fabricius is the maturation site for B cells. And because of that, because in the birds, first time of the B cells has been identified, that is why they are known as B cells. So B here means bursa, right? Not the bone marrow, right? Now let's talk about secondary lymphoid organs. Secondary lymphoid organs, right? So secondary lymphoid organs, first is your spleen, right? And spleen, it is present here below the heart. right? And it is also a highly organized lymphoid organ, right? And it is a large organ located into the abdominal cavity. Abdominal cavity, right? And spleen is specialized in the filtering blood and trapping blood-borne microbes and antigens. Trapping antigens, or simply you can say the pathogens, right? Now these trapped antigens, they get destroyed by the dendritic and macrophagic cells. Macrophagic cells, which are already present in the spleen through the process which is called phagocytosis, right? So less than amino acid, less than 50 amino acid residues, they were actually represented on the surface of macrophagic cells, where they act as antigen tags, right? And these antigen tags were actually represented to B and T cells, right? So this leads to the lymphocyte activation, right? So this is about the spleen organ, right? Another secondary lymphoid organ is your lymph nodes. So this is the image of lymph node here, and this one is present in the form of lymphatic vessel. So it is a web-like structures present in our body, distributed whole in our body, and they are connected by the simple lymph nodes. Lymph nodes, right? So they actually lie at the junction of lymphatic vessels, if you can say. So as you can see here, so these are dot-like structures are your lymph nodes, right? And they are connected by the lymphatic vessels. And their function, the lymph node function here is again to filter and trap the microbes, right? And these microbes then again being killed by macrophages and dendritic cells, which are present in the lymph nodes, right? And then again these macrophages, they present the antigens to what? To the T and B lymphocytes, and according to that, specific immune response is being activated, right? So at this site, B cells differentiate. So in the lymph node, again, B cells also gets differentiated into memory B cells. Memory B cells, right? And antibody, number one, memory B cells. Second, antibody secreting plasma cells. Right? Which involves in the activation, which involve special type of T cells known as T helper cells, right? So antibody secretion here, it needs special type of T cells which are called T helper cells, and they leads to the production of memory B cells and antibody production, right? So when the antigen is being presented by the macrophages and the dendritic cells to the T helper cells, when antigen presenting cells, they present the antigen to T helper cell, then it actually secretes cytokines. It secretes cytokines, which are the chemical mediators, and they actually mediate B cell specific immune response against the pathogen, right? Another secondary lymphoid organ is your lymphoid tissues. Right? And lymphoid tissues are found all over the body, and they act as regional center for antigen sampling, its processing. Right? This one again, it's highly organized and loosely associated with cellular complexes. Right? For example, one of the lymphoid tissue is called skin associated lymphoid tissue. Right? This one is also known as SALT. Another one is your mucus associated lymphoid tissue. This one is called MALT. Right? Another one, third one, is your gut associated lymphoid tissue. This one is called GALT. And fourth one is the bronchial associated lymphoid tissue. This one is called BALT. Right? So all are highly organized lymphoid tissues. Right? So primary role of the lymphoid tissues here is to organize leukocytes. To increase the interaction. Between innate, specific or acquired immunity. Innate and specific immunity. Right? So these lymphoid tissues actually, they act as interface. Between both innate and acquired immunity. Right? So simply we say microbes, when they actually attempt to invade a host, they actually gets greeted by number one, non-specific immune response, your physical and chemical barriers, and different type of immune cells like granulocytes and agranulocytes. right? Where these responses, they actually kill the invading pathogen. They kills the invading pathogen and digest it and change it into the small antigens, right? So from the larger size microbes, they finally gets converted into the smaller antigens, right? And these smaller antigens, they actually represented at the surface of your phagocytic cells, which leads to the activation activation of lymphocytes which are present in different type of organs like thymus, like bone marrow, like spleen and the lymph nodes, right? So this is how the immune responses are being triggered when a pathogenic microbes it enters into the host body, right? So this is all about the organs and lymphoid tissues which are actually present in the play a very important role in the immune responses, right? So that's all for the today. Thank you.